August 17th, 2005, and 12:15 a.m. Markham, Ontario is asleep, porch lights off, windows drawn, the quiet hum of suburban calm drifting through the air. But on one narrow street, lined with identical two-story homes, something terrible is about to unfold. A motion light flickers on behind a small brick house. A woman's shoes rest neatly beside the open gate, as if she had stepped out of them voluntarily. But she didn't. From the front of the house, everything seems peaceful. Inside, her mother and stepfather are asleep, unaware that their daughter is being dragged into the darkness just a few feet away. No one hears the muffled scream. No one hears the thud. By sunrise, Alicia Ross will be gone. And for weeks, police, neighbours, and the entire country will be asking the same impossible question. How can a young woman vanish from her own backyard, without a sound, without a witness, and without a single clue? This isn't just another disappearance. This is the story of how an ordinary night turned into a nightmare that shattered a family, divided a community, and revealed a monster living right next door. Before we get into this shocking case, if you're drawn to mysteries that seem unsolvable, where justice hides in plain sight, hit that subscribe button right now. This isn't just another missing person story, it's a descent into one of Canada's most chilling betrayals. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments and let's see how far Alicia's story reaches. Markham, Ontario, the kind of place where people wave to their neighbours, mow their lawns on Sundays. A suburb just north of Toronto, it's peaceful, predictable, and proud of it. The smell of barbecues fills the summer air, and kids ride their bikes past rows of identical homes that all look safe. But that illusion would shatter overnight when a woman disappeared right under her family's roof. On one quiet August evening, a young woman named Alicia Ross returned home after a walk with her mum. Nothing seemed unusual. Laughter, dogs barking, a casual goodnight, a moment of calm before the storm. Within hours, that peace would vanish. Police would arrive, helicopters would circle, and for the first time, Markham would realise that evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it lives next door. Alicia Ross wasn't famous. She didn't live a reckless life or take unnecessary risks. She was simply loved, deeply and quietly, by everyone who knew her. Born on February 8th, 1980 in Markham, Alicia's life began with a twist of fate. When she was still a baby, she was adopted by a couple who adored her unconditionally. They described her as radiant, with a laugh that filled rooms and a stubborn streak that always made her stand out. Even after her parents divorced, Alicia grew up grounded and secure. She stayed with her mum, but visited her dad regularly. Summers were her favourite time of year. That's when she'd escape to the lakes, paddle a canoe across the water until her arms burned, and teach kids how to love the outdoors as much as she did. Her friends called her the Sunshine Girl, because she always seemed to bring light wherever she went. When Alicia graduated, she landed a job at HP's Canadian branch in sales. It wasn't glamorous, but she took it seriously. Her co-workers said she had this unstoppable drive, the kind that made her boss notice. And in the summer of 2005, that hard work was finally paying off. She had just learned she'd be getting a promotion the very next day. At home, Alicia lived in the basement apartment of her mother's house, a cosy setup with its own private entrance. It was the perfect balance between independence and family connection. She could come and go as she pleased, yet still be just a staircase away from her mum and stepdad. August 16th, 2005 was a typical warm summer evening. Alicia and her mum took their dogs for a walk, chatting about work, life, and her upcoming promotion. They returned home around 10 p.m, and Alicia's boyfriend, Sean, stopped by not long after. They talked for hours, laughing and planning the next day. When Sean left just before midnight, Alicia walked him out, barefoot on the cool grass. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. By morning, her car was still in the driveway. Her shoes were on the grass. Her purse and keys were still inside. And her bed, untouched. Something had happened between midnight and dawn. Something so silent, so calculated, that even her family sleeping just a room away heard nothing. When police arrived, they found no forced entry, no blood, no screams, no signs of struggle. Only that open gate, the shoes on the grass, and the chilling realization that Alicia hadn't made it past her own backyard. Detectives began asking the same question every missing person case starts with. Did she leave on her own? But they'd soon discover this wasn't a disappearance. It was an abduction. One that would turn a quiet community into a crime scene and ignite one of the largest searches in Ontario's history. And yet, the person responsible wasn't a stranger lurking in the dark. He was already there, just a few feet away, watching it all unfold. But nobody knew that yet. The next morning, Markham woke to the sound of sirens. A police cruiser parked quietly in front of the Ross home while officers moved in and out, their radios crackling. To the neighbours, it looked like a welfare check. But inside, the tone was different, urgent, heavy, and fearful. Alicia's boyfriend, Sean, had been the first to call. His voice on the 911 line was trembling. "My girlfriend's gone. Her shoes are here. Her car's here. Everything's here except her." When police arrived, they found Alicia's belongings untouched. The bed was still made, her pyjamas still folded on the dresser, and the ring she always removed before bed lay beside the bathroom sink. It looked as if she'd never made it that far. Even Detective Sergeant Graham Gibson, one of York Regional Police's most seasoned investigators, took the lead. His first impression? This wasn't a runaway. Something bad had happened. Something personal. He moved from room to room, searching for even a trace of disturbance. But the home was spotless. No fingerprints out of place, no broken window, no blood. Just that eerie silence that screamed louder than any evidence could. Outside, the summer sun was already baking the quiet street. Neighbours gathered in small clusters, whispering. Most had seen Alicia around, jogging, walking her dogs, smiling at everyone. The idea that something could have happened to her just steps from her door didn't make sense. By afternoon, police had cordoned off the yard and were photographing every inch of the property. The gate, the grass, the small cup on the ground, everything. The shoes became the centerpiece of the scene. They looked deliberate, placed neatly side by side, as if she'd just stepped out of them and vanished. Detectives brought Sean in for questioning. After all, he was the last person to see her alive. Inside the interrogation room, Sean sat quietly, hands clasped. He told detectives that Alicia had been happy that night. Excited about her promotion, relaxed, laughing. He left around midnight, drove home, and tried calling her shortly after. She didn't answer. He assumed she'd gone to sleep. But when she didn't pick up the next morning and missed work, he knew something was wrong. To investigators, it was suspicious. Why report someone missing so quickly? Why not call her mother first? Sean explained that he had tried her mum's number, but when there was no answer, panic set in. Alicia was never late for work, never unreachable. Something was off, and he could feel it in his gut. Still, detectives had to consider every angle. They searched Sean's car, checked his phone, and canvassed his neighbourhood. They even asked his neighbours if they'd seen him doing anything strange that night. Taking out the trash, washing his car, driving off late. Nothing. No evidence. No blood. No reason to believe he'd done anything wrong, but the media didn't see it that way. The story spread like wildfire across Canada. Boyfriend last to see missing woman. Talk shows debated his guilt. Reporters camped outside his home, and strangers on the internet called him the perfect liar. Meanwhile, Alicia's mother was breaking down. The guilt of not hearing anything that night haunted her. Every creak of the house became a memory of what she'd missed. "She was right below me," she said later. "If she called out, I didn't hear it. I should have heard it." As days turned into weeks, the case only grew colder. Helicopters scanned the nearby woods. Search dogs combed through fields. Flyers went up on every lamppost. Over 400 volunteers joined the search. Firefighters, neighbours, even strangers from nearby towns. The community command centre was set up in a local school gymnasium, filled with maps, lists, and boxes of bottled water, and yet nothing, No body, no trace, no clue. That absence of evidence and that nothingness became the loudest part of the case. The police couldn't shake the feeling that whoever took Alicia had done it quickly, quietly, and without leaving a single mark. Still, all eyes remained on Sean. At this point in the story, it's easy to do what most people did: assume the boyfriend must be guilty. After all, he was the last to see her. But here's the problem: real monsters love that assumption. They hide behind it. They let innocent people take the blame while they walk free. The man who actually killed Alicia was counting on everyone blaming someone else. By early September, detectives were exhausted. Every lead had collapsed. Every theory had been disproven. Sean stopped cooperating with the police after the media branded him guilty, but not because he had anything to hide. He was simply crushed. He'd lost his girlfriend and was now the face of the investigation. Weeks passed. The posters began to fade. Reporters left. The school that served as search headquarters reopened for fall classes, and the police had to pack up their equipment. But the investigators didn't give up. They started looking closer to home, literally. They rechecked every house within a few hundred meters of Alicia's home, interviewing neighbors again, this time with sharper questions. Did anyone see lights on late? Hear a car start? Notice anything strange? One name came up more than once: Daniel Sylvester. He lived right next door. Quiet guy, early 30s, kept to himself. Most neighbors described him as odd, but harmless. He rarely spoke, never hosted guests, and spent most of his time inside. Police had knocked on his door early in the investigation, but he'd claimed he didn't see or hear anything. His story seemed straightforward, so they moved on. What they didn't know was that Daniel had been watching every moment unfold, including the search parties, the press conferences, even the police canvassing his street. And all the while, he kept a secret so dark it would later make seasoned detectives sick to their stomachs. September 20th, 2005. Just over a month since Alicia disappeared. A man walked into the police station in downtown Markham. He wasn't handcuffed, he wasn't under arrest. He came on his own, with his lawyer by his side. His name was Daniel Sylvester, and what he said next stopped the entire department in their tracks. "I killed her," he said. "I killed Alicia Ross." Detectives stared at him, unsure if they'd heard correctly. He repeated himself calmly, "It was me." Then, without being asked, he got down on the floor of the interrogation room and acted out exactly how he had done it. Where he'd struck her, how she'd fallen, and how he'd realized she wasn't breathing anymore. The officers watching described it as surreal, not the ranting of a madman, but the cold confession of someone who had accepted what he was. Daniel explained that around 1:30 a.m. on August 17th, he stepped outside his home for a smoke. He saw Alicia near the alleyway between their houses and startled her. They exchanged words. She accused him of creeping around. He claimed she insulted him. And in that moment, he snapped. He hit her once, then again, harder. When she tried to fight back, he grabbed her, slammed her head against the stone walkway, and kept hitting her until she stopped moving. Then silence. Daniel stood over her lifeless body, realizing what he'd done. Panic set in. He dragged her into his garage, hosed the blood from the ground, stripped her and himself, and stuffed both sets of clothes into trash bags. He wrapped her head with rags and duct tape, lined the trunk of his mother's car with cardboard, and loaded her inside. At 5 a.m., while his mother slept inside the house, Daniel drove out to a remote area near a small town called Manila. There, he dumped Alicia's body and the bags of clothes into a swampy ditch. When he got home, he realized his wallet, with his ID and credit cards, had been in one of the bags. Over the following days, he went back several times to try to find it, but he couldn't. Weeks later, afraid the police would discover the body, he returned to move the remains, what was left of them, to another location near Coboconk, Ontario. He confessed to everything, no bargaining, no hesitation, just the truth, as horrifying as it was. When police took him back to the site, he showed them where he'd left her. they found Alicia's remains, exactly where he said they'd be. At that moment, the mystery that had haunted Markham finally had an answer, but the revelation didn't bring peace. It brought outrage. Because Daniel Sylvester wasn't some mysterious predator. He wasn't an intruder. He was the quiet neighbour living just a few feet away, watching Alicia's family grieve every single day, and nobody had ever suspected him. For investigators, the confession wasn't enough. They needed evidence. Proof that what Daniel Sylvester had just admitted wasn't another false lead or some twisted attempt at attention. So they followed him out to the sites he described. When the team arrived at the wooded area near Coboconk, Ontario, Daniel pointed silently at the ground. The autumn air was sharp, and the leaves had started to turn, reds and golds swirling underfoot. It was eerily beautiful, which only made the task more haunting. Detectives began to dig. Within minutes, the earth gave up its secret. Human remains partially decomposed, wrapped in a tarp just as Daniel had described. Nearby they found remnants of duct tape, fabric rags, and fragments of the clothing Alicia had been wearing the night she vanished. The forensic team documented everything, bagging each piece with care. Back at the lab, forensic anthropologists examined the remains. There were at least 30 separate fractures, consistent with a brutal beating. The skull showed multiple blunt force injuries. The coroner couldn't identify an exact cause of death, but it was clear. Alicia had been beaten beyond survival. When investigators retraced Daniel's confession, everything lined up: his timeline, the dumping locations, the items recovered. All matched perfectly. It was a confession backed by evidence, and it was damning. But there was something else that disturbed detectives even more. When Daniel was asked why, his answer wasn't coherent. He didn't mention anger, passion, or intent. He said he just lost control. As if a life could end because of a bad mood. Detectives pressed harder. They asked if he'd been stalking her, if he had feelings for her, if he'd ever watched her through her windows. Daniel denied it all, but his calmness made them uneasy. This wasn't the demeanour of someone remorseful. It was the cold composure of someone relieved to be caught. And then came the detail that turned their stomachs. After hiding Alicia's body the second time, Daniel told police he pleasured himself to calm down, claiming it wasn't sexual toward Alicia, just stress relief. For investigators, that was when the line between rage and depravity became impossible to separate. This wasn't just a loss of control. It was the exposure of a deeply disturbed man who had finally revealed who he truly was. Look at what Daniel Sylvester did. He stole a young woman's life over a petty argument, then desecrated her memory with actions that defy human decency. If you can't stand people like this, people who destroy innocence and call it a mistake, comment, "I stand with Alicia Ross right now," because only predators and cowards scroll past injustice. Let Daniel's name be forgotten, and Alicia's remembered forever. When the public learned who had killed Alicia Ross, outrage erupted. The man who had confessed was her neighbour. He lived just a few feet away, separated by a single wall of bricks and a narrow alleyway. The same neighbour who watched police officers comb her backyard. The same man who stood quietly as search parties gathered on his street. The same man who likely saw Alicia's mother collapse in grief just yards from his window. For weeks, Daniel had lived alongside the very people whose lives he had destroyed, and not once had anyone suspected him. Journalists dug into his background. They found no criminal record, no history of violence, but former classmates described him as anxious, withdrawn, and socially awkward. He'd been bullied for years. Women avoided him. He lacked confidence, friends, and emotional stability. Still, nothing in his past justified what he'd done. It was as if a lifetime of isolation had finally boiled over, and Alicia had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. When he confessed, some people in Markham felt relief, others felt horror, because it meant that the danger they'd feared, a killer lurking in the shadows, had never been far away. He'd been right there, smiling politely at the search parties that were unknowingly walking past his crime. Daniel Sylvester was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. But even as he sat in a holding cell, the legal battle over what exactly to call his crime began to unfold. The prosecution argued that this was murder, deliberate, brutal, and sustained. They believed that Daniel had fixated on Alicia for some time, that he might have watched her from his windows or even followed her. To them, his confession wasn't about remorse, it was about fear of discovery. Why? Because he'd thrown away his wallet with the evidence. It was only a matter of time before someone found it near the first dump site, tied it to him, and exposed everything. The defense, however, painted a different picture. They claimed Daniel didn't plan to kill Alicia, that he had simply snapped during an argument. His lawyer described him as a man crippled by anxiety, depression, and social rejection. Someone who'd never learned how to manage anger, who acted in the heat of the moment and regretted it instantly. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. During the psychiatric evaluation, a disturbing truth surfaced. Daniel had admitted to violent fantasies before. He told the psychiatrist he sometimes imagined jumping out of bushes to attack women, or exposing himself to strangers. That testimony shattered any illusion of accident. It painted Daniel as a predator who'd finally acted on his fantasies. In court, the prosecution presented his confession in excruciating detail. They played recordings of his voice describing how he hit her, how she fell, how he realized she wasn't breathing. The jury listened in silence, faces pale, jaws tight. Then the physical evidence, the tarp, the rags, the duct tape, the broken bones. The scene was overwhelming. Even the judge paused before addressing the court, acknowledging the unbearable pain Alicia's family had endured. As the days went on, Daniel's calm demeanour became his own undoing. He never cried, never protested, never pleaded for forgiveness. It was as though the confession had drained him of humanity. And when Alicia's mother took the stand, the courtroom broke. Through tears, she spoke about the daughter who'd once filled their home with laughter, the girl who taught children to canoe, who stayed close even as she built her own life. He didn't just kill her, she said, he killed every dream she had. Her words hung in the air like a curse. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom fell silent. Daniel Sylvester was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. But to Alicia's family, no number could equal justice. Their daughter was gone, and the man who took her had lived steps away for years. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom stood still. The air felt heavy, as if even the walls held their breath. The clerk's voice cut through the silence. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Sylvester, guilty of second-degree murder. Alicia's mother clutched her husband's hand. Her eyes didn't move from Daniel, not once. There was no outburst, no scream, just a quiet exhale, as if years of held breath had finally escaped. Daniel didn't react, no emotion, no visible regret. He just blinked, glanced toward the floor, and whispered something under his breath that no one could hear. Some say it was, "I'm sorry." Others say it was, "It's done." The judge sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameramen shouted questions no one wanted to answer. All that mattered was that, at last, Alicia's family had a name. And the name had a face. But justice, in cases like this, never feels clean. For Sean, the boyfriend, who'd spent weeks branded as a suspect, the verdict brought little peace. He told journalists later that those 30 days of suspicion were a living hell. He couldn't leave his house without people staring, whispering, or calling him a murderer under their breath. He had lost his girlfriend, his peace and his reputation, all before the truth came out. A local newspaper that had once implied his guilt published a rare public apology. It admitted that the rush to judgment had amplified an already devastating tragedy. Sean accepted the apology quietly. He said the only thing he ever wanted was for people to remember Alicia, not the lies told about her. Meanwhile, the Ross family began their long, painful recovery. They founded the Alicia Ross Memorial Fund, dedicated to helping underprivileged kids attend canoeing camps, honouring her love for the water and the outdoors. Each summer, dozens of children paddled across the same lakes Alicia once did, carrying her name and memory with them. Still, her mother admitted she often found herself standing by the back gate at night, staring at that quiet patch of grass where Alicia's shoes had once been found. "It's strange," she said in an interview. "That gate used to mean freedom for her, now it just means goodbye." Even with Daniel behind bars, questions lingered. Questions that couldn't be buried with a verdict. Did Alicia know him beyond the casual wave between neighbours? Had she ever felt unsafe? Or was this truly just a moment of rage that turned fatal? Police searched Daniel's computer and journals for signs of obsession or planning, but found nothing solid. No messages, no stalking, no threats. Just fragments of a lonely man's thoughts. Still, the psychiatrist's testimony about his violent fantasies left many wondering whether Alicia's death had really been spontaneous at all. Experts debated the meaning of his loss of control. Some said it was the culmination of years of social rejection. A man exploding after years of bottled frustration. Others believed it was a mask for something darker. An excuse for a predator who wanted to rewrite his own story. And what about that first dumping site? Forensics confirmed that not all of Alicia's remains were moved to the second location. Some pieces were left behind. Fragments of a life scattered across two lonely towns, like unfinished sentences. The unanswered questions hung over the community for years. Even now, some locals say they can't drive through Markham without thinking of the case. They remember the posters, the volunteers, the helicopters, and the quiet horror that something like this could happen right where they lived. Alicia's mother once said, "You don't stop being a parent when your child dies, you just start parenting a memory instead." That memory, she promised, would never fade. Daniel Sylvester wanted silence. He wanted Alicia's story to fade, for her name to become just another file in a cabinet marked closed. But silence protects predators. Silence erases victims. If you believe Alicia Ross mattered, if you believe that justice means remembering the names of those taken too soon, then hit like and subscribe right now. Because monsters like Daniel depend on the world forgetting. Prove them wrong. Let Alicia's story echo longer than his crime ever will. The murder of Alicia Ross didn't just expose the danger lurking in the dark. It exposed the illusion of safety that communities often cling to. Markham wasn't a city of violence. It was ordinary, comfortable, predictable, and maybe that's what made her disappearance so terrifying. She didn't walk into danger. Danger came to her doorstep. Her case reminded the world that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind curtains and polite smiles. Sometimes it waves hello. Today, the spot where Alicia once lived still looks the same. A neat brick home with a trimmed lawn and a quiet street. But for those who know the story, it will never just be another address. It's a reminder that every light left on at night, every bark from a restless dog, every silence that feels too quiet, could be the sound of something we'll never see coming. The police officers who worked her case still call it one of the most haunting of their careers, because they'd been right there, standing just feet from the killer and never realised it. If there's one thing Alicia's story teaches us, it's that monsters rarely look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the man next door. The story of Alicia Ross is heartbreaking, but not unique. Across North America, hundreds of women vanish every year under eerily similar circumstances. If you think this case was disturbing, you need to hear about the woman who vanished from her wedding night in British Columbia. A case so bizarre, it left investigators questioning everything they knew about accidents. That investigation is live right now. Click that video before it disappears from your feed. And remember, Alicia Ross, 25 years old. loved the water. Gone, but never forgotten.